Hello. Good morning. I'm Tara McGuinness. I was like, is this the clicker?
Yes.
Great. I'm an advisor to the president through the Office of Management and Budget, which may be your unexpected place for place-based zealotry in the federal government. Before I get started, though, I wanted to just ask you to maybe humor me, close your eyes, and we've had a lot of talk about community partners and who they are and how we find them and are they ready. Just to picture maybe a single person who you work with, who represents for you an organizer, a leader that you're trying to embody in your work through philanthropy. Maybe I'll ask you, did any of you picture this guy, my boss, who as a human being, as a leader, is really very, very formed by his experience as a community organizer. As many of us are, I am as well. I'm not sure that you pictured me. I also had an old jacket and time in some neighborhoods in Philadelphia. But I wanted to start, as we move this talk towards the future and where we're going, with a bit from on the Fed side about how we got where we are, and I'll be very brief about that. But it's incredibly instructive to our placemaking work that this organizer is our organizer-in-chief. He sits behind the HM Resolute desk, which was crashed off the shores of Alaska a number of years ago. He brings to and has brought over the past 8 years a charge that is a lot of what you heard Joseph trying to channel. How do you bring the voices of actual lived experiences to the table? That was how the president cut his teeth. And I can say that on the advisors and staff side, we feel that very frequently when, in Chicago, he's very clear that he did not see the federal government as, let alone an ally, certainly not an assister. He organized a bus of community organizers to go make the federal government do its job on housing. This has been formative to the way that a lot of our wholesale policies have been initiated. The president is frequently the most aggressive questioner of, yeah, but I appreciate the new grant announcement. How would I know if I was sitting in Kentucky or the south side of Chicago? I don't have time to write a grant. How would I see that you're trying to make this more streamlined. But so I wanted to kind of set that perspective and talk a little bit about how in a year of transition, you don't have to rely on there permanently being an organizer-in-chief in the Oval Office. We've made some people and structural changes outside of our programs that are aimed at creating a culture inside the federal government of partners, the same sort of internal work that I hear many of you doing and wrestling with doing, we're doing as the federal government. And I say this with a level of humility that it's a long pathway, and that I'm sure in this room you probably have as many experiences of it not yet working as you do of it working. But I wanted to kind of do a little bit of a reveal on the way that we think about this work. First, the expansion of placemaking from the federal government has gone from what was arguably boutique. You had 5 agencies working in 38 places a decade ago in placemaking from the federal government side. Today, you have 16 agencies working in 1,800 communities. I decided not to add all of the communities on this map, but if you go to this website, if you're curious about what are placemaking grants in your communities, you can plug in Anchorage, Alaska, or Gary in Indiana, or Flint, Michigan, and pull up the grants that are placemaking grants as a way to try to map on top of what we're doing. This effort is born out of, I'm not going to talk about the individual programs that you work with, choice neighborhoods or promise zones, but maybe a bit more about the approach that's driving what would be 24 kind of changes inside the federal government. We really anchor this in 4 characteristics. They may look familiar because I think they're some of the core characteristics that you all are working with. The first that would be a hallmark of this administration is locally led. So what do we mean when we say locally led? This is an attempt in the ways that the federal government works in partnership to ask for, to solicit through grant applications or through a more collaborative process what communities are interested in before we run in. We have a long and storied past of running a railroad or a highway or a project through a particular part of town, and we know and own this legacy. And so we're working on being sometimes at the table, sometimes leading the table. Just to give you one specific example of this, in Fresno, California, do we have anyone working in Fresno here? I know we have a lot of Californians. Fresno, through a community-led process and a dynamic Republican mayor, decided they were going to do some more engagement in the downtown Fulton area. This process was relatively sustainably oriented, and we embedded a federal leader in Fresno with the mayor to work to think about what are the ways the federal government could engage more deeply. One of the ways we could was we were relocating a federal building at the time. 4,300 federal workers moved downtown instead of to the outskirts of town, allowing more foot traffic in an area that the mayor was working to redevelop. And this is just one way when you might think of not just grants resources, how can the federal government be better aligned at doing engagement in community or using things like our own federal real estate. The second characteristic is long-term planning. We're historically the people who do individual projects, whether it's transport, but thinking about, as you heard from Joseph, how infrastructure build works in the context of neighborhood equity. One quick example in Detroit, there was a very serious charge from the community in Detroit a few years ago. Detroit in 2014, I know we have folks who work in Detroit, was literally more than 50% in darkness. Perhaps psychologically in other ways, but the streetlights were out in the vast majority of the city. People were stealing the copper wire and selling it for parts, walking in the middle of the road and getting hit by cars. The city was about to go through a process of just relighting the lights the way they had been. We had someone embedded in the team there who said, in North Carolina, they relit LED, it's less expensive. At first, folks, LED, we just want to get the lights up. We don't want to run a new process. Well, it saves the carbon footprint of 11,000 cars and $3 million a year. We helped them put together a little study to say you could go this way. It was the city's vision to do lights. A little bit of technical assistance allowed them to do that in a way where they're now an anchor for wireless in a bunch of communities that doesn't have wireless, where they're much more green and reducing the carbon footprint in the city. The third characteristic is a streamlined federal government. This is aspirational, but we're making some progress. In Corbin, Kentucky, a community that's kind of hard hit, there was a local leader, hipster, who wanted to return to his hometown and start a small business, but getting downtown foot traffic, he built his own brewery. He was interested in looking around and partnered up with one leader from the federal government. There are 38 agencies that do kind of downtown farmers market food development. We went in and streamlined it. We just brought everyone who works on this, 6 agencies, to the table and said, what are you interested in? They wanted a farmers market. The downtown rate of having occupancy went from 4% to 40%. People moved very easily from a farmer's market, which with a little Fed money to start with, from Dewdrop Pottery, which sold pots at the farmer's market, got a storefront very inexpensively. And the downtown, kind of from this local vision of a number of younger leaders who didn't feel represented at the organizing level, with a bit of Fed assistance in our Streamlined local foods, local places effort, helped bring things together. Finally, data-driven. These are the hallmarks. We're using data in new ways to help identify where there may be greater places of need. We're using data to assess and trying to arm our own folks with tools. So these are really the 4 characteristics, and it is these characteristics we're working to embed. I want to say just a minute or two. You may know President Obama, the organizer. I don't know if anyone in here knows Lynette McCrae. Last time I threw Lynette's picture up, 3 people, including the mayor of Rockford, stood up and said, I love Lynette McCrae. Lynette's a former community organizer. She's now a Fed public servant. She's on her 2nd tour of duty. She worked in Rockford, Illinois, doing some incredible work there with the community. She's now in Sacramento as the Promise Zone lead. We are working in a couple ways, and I'll just do a quick reveal on this, to change our federal architecture. So when the president leaves office, there'll be 62 new positions across the federal government. One of them works really closely with Javier inside the NEA, which we bring to every table where we're talking about placemaking. There's a permanent position to align arts resources with transportation and economic development resources. This is one of these 62 new roles. Others are like Lynette's that are permanent positions out in communities. These are all largely community-facing roles. The second thing we're doing, and these are partners you can count on, irrespective of what the next new initiatives are, is we're investing in our own people. I heard a number of folks yesterday say the organizers, you have to invest in the people who are working on the front lines of communities, and sometimes they don't have the skills. We've already trained, and by the end of the year, we'll train 400 federal career leaders who are working at the community level in real organizing training and a lot of the skills and new techniques. And I'd encourage you all, and this is one of the questions I'd like to put on the table, how do we have conversations that we're having about cultural change inside our institutions work together? You guys are thinking a lot about that on the philanthropy side. The last question I want to leave you with is, can we do more of this work together? And the federal government in 2015 spent $590 billion with a B dollars in state and local grants to communities. If you are not working with the federal government as a partner, and particularly the career architecture of the federal government, I'd ask you to contemplate whether there may be space at your table or in your planning process or in your building a network of allies, whether that's NEA or HUD or EPA, and I'm happy to help you figure out who those folks are. We built kind of a flat community practice for that. I'm going to save the rest for the Q&A. I'm very grateful to be here as a participant in your conversation, but I wanted you to know that you don't need an organizer-in-chief. We're building an architecture of career leaders who came to federal service because of the same things that drive all of you in their work, and we're working to share practices at an architectural level beyond the initiatives, because a lot of this is in the lifeblood of what happens in between election cycles. So thank you very much, and maybe I'll turn it over to conversation.